Okay, so we're moving on to the next chapter, which is all about protected areas. It is chapter 8. So here's a little joke cartoon, wildlife preserves. So the definition of protected areas is a clearly defined geographical space recognized, dedicated, and managed through legal or other effective means to achieve long-term conservation of nature with associated ecosystem services and cultural values. The UN Convention on Biological Diversity's goal for 2020 was to have 17% of terrestrial areas in inland waters and 10% of coastal and marine waters in protected areas. We're about 2.2 million kilometers squared short of this goal. And I did want to point out President Biden has recently made a goal of, they called it 30 by 30, and the idea is to have 30% of the United States land and marine in protected areas by 2030, so 30% by 2030. Preserving ecosystems involves establishing protected areas, which we'll talk about, creating networks of connected areas, also in this chapter, and managing protected areas effectively. We also need conservation outside of protected areas and also need to restore biological communities in degraded areas in order to meet these ambitious goals. So we'll be talking here about protected areas in Chapter 8. Chapter 9 is all about conservation outside of protected areas, and Chapter 10 will be about restoration. So, how are protected areas established? There are a few different ways. They can be established through government action, land purchases and easements by private individuals and conservation organizations. An example of this is the Nature Conservancy buys lots of properties and conserves a lot of land. They are one of the nonprofits that really own a decent amount of land, and they do these easements, which is still owned by a private individual, but they're protecting it for conservation. Indigenous and traditional societies also establish protected areas, and then universities and research organizations also have protected areas. So things like biological field stations can be owned by universities or research organizations and are protected as well. This shows the different IUCN protected area designations. All protected areas are not the same. They have different guidelines, different ways they're managed. So we have strict nature reserves, which are managed mainly for scientific research and monitoring. We have wilderness areas, which are really large areas of unmodified land or ocean. National parks, which is probably what most people are familiar with. They're managed mainly for ecosystem protection and recreation. National monuments are conservation of specific natural features. We have habitat and species management areas. These are managed mainly for conservation through management intervention. We have protected landscapes and seascapes, which are managed mainly for conservation and recreation. And they have more interaction with people and have areas of a distinct character with significant aesthetic, ecological, and or cultural value, often with high biological diversity. And managed resource protected areas, managed mainly for sustainable use, so meaning that there is a lot of human interaction with those.